welcome to our podcast. I'm Jade McEvoy, HR consultant from After Athena. I'm joined today by Christian, HR consultancy team lead, also from After Athena. Today, we're going to be looking at the growing challenges of burnout and quiet quitting, two distinct but closely connected signs of employee disengagement. We'll be looking at the difference between burnout and quiet quitting. We'll be looking at the key warning signs to watch out for in your teams, how poor culture, workload, and lack of growth opportunities contribute, and why surface level perks don't fix the deep rooted causes. In addition, we'll be looking at the practical people first strategies to re engage your workforce. So, whether you're in HR, leadership, or just curious about how to support well-being in your organisation, this episode offers real world insights and actionable takeaways for all to consider. Um, just kicking off then with what is burnout and quiet quitting. On the one hand, we have burnout, um, which is often caused by exhaustion, chronic stress, and overwork. And then we've got quiet quitting, which ultimately is a withdrawal of discretionary effort. And I think both are signs of disengagement and can be rooted within poor leadership, culture, or lack of support, even. What's your thoughts, Emma?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think poor leadership and culture can have a significant impact on both quiet quitting and burnout. Burnout is clearly a mental health issue. Mental health in itself is quite a complex disorder with lots and lots of different elements to that. I think with burnout, it can quite quietly creep up on people. It's quite difficult to pick up on early. There are some interventions and there's certainly things that businesses, and obviously we'll talk about that in terms of trying to support their employees. But it's really around making sure that there's a good well-being strategy in place to ensure that burnout doesn't occur. Quiet quitting obviously is slightly different in that, we're talking about that withdrawal discretionary effort, people just switching off. And that absolutely can be driven by again, poor leadership and culture, making sure that people do have challenging roles that are engaging, that want to keep them motivated to do what they want to do and have opportunities for development where possible as well. But ultimately, both can have the same impact in that from a business perspective, it's going to absolutely impact productivity. It's going to have impact on staff morale more widely. And it's something that businesses do need to take notice of and look to try and put measures in place to avoid.
Yeah, I agree. I think quite often people that are quiet quitting and becoming more withdrawn and disengaged can often be looked at as lazy. That's not always the case. Just like burnout doesn't always apply to high achievers,
Mm.
it can happen to anyone at any time. And I think managers, HR leaders, need to be akin to that and understanding that um, we really need to be addressing the root cause of the problem.
Hmm.
And so often, we're looking at surface level perks, things like, as much as it's nice, a fruit bowl in the corner of the office
Yeah.
isn't gonna get to the bottom of that. It's about really getting to understand individuals within your teams, and if somebody is becoming withdrawn and they are acting out of character, then to have your ears to the ground with that and to be in tune with that and making sure that you do address it early. Because so often I think the signs of both burnout and quiet quitting can be overlooked.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I agree with what you've said there. We've touched on some of the warning signs and why they shouldn't be dismissed. And the impact that that can have. Thinking about reduced productivity, sort of emotional detachment, which all feeds into wider issues. You're looking at then replacing people because they eventually might end up leaving. Um, why should we be looking at culture and workload as drivers, do you think, to burnout and quiet quitting?
Well, I think the first thing for me is about role design.
Yeah.
So it's essential. Businesses do sometimes get into a habit. Someone's left, they've got a resignation, they need to fill a position. It gets into a bit of a cycle. They'll put an advert out and they're looking for like for like. And they're not necessarily addressing the real reasons why that person may have chosen to leave in the first place and looked at what the role actually was expecting them to achieve. Was it actually achievable? So I would always encourage any business when they do have a leaver, whether it's going to be a brand new role or a replacement, that they just take that little bit of time to reassess the needs. So just look at the job description. What are we wanting from this person? And actually, what we had from that person, is that what we want now? Because that could have shifted. So it could be that actually we want a different level of position. We might not need somebody as senior, or we might need somebody more senior. Um, but most importantly, what are we actually expecting them to do in their working week? Is it really achievable? So doing a little bit of a time study in terms of looking at the tasks, how often those tasks will need to be completed, in terms of how long they're going to be taking, and can we really expect that one person to be able to achieve all of those things? Um, and if obviously the answer is yes, then great. Then it's, full steam ahead. Let's advertise. Let's get somebody in. The other thing that's important as part of that recruitment process is really understand the character of the person as well. Now, I'm a massive believer, not every role is for every person. Not every company is for every person. Some people leave companies because they've just not fit in and the culture's not quite right. That does not mean that that company is a really poor company to work for. Just people are people and everybody's unique and have different expectations. So it's just important that when you are looking for that person, that you are taking time to carefully select who's going to fit in well with that culture. And that's going to be more and more important if we're thinking about the Employment Rights Bill that's going to be coming in place. Whilst we have got a little bit of leeway at the moment in terms of when this legislation is going to change, but day one rights are going to come into play. So your time with your probation period, etc., is going to be exceptionally important. So putting the work in up front before they come through the door will make a massive difference in ensuring that hopefully you've got that right person in the role to begin with. And once they're on board, it's making sure that we've carefully helped them embed into the role, that we've given them all the tools, that we're helping them settle in, that we're upskilling them, we're training them. We might be having somebody shadow them, that they feel that they are really part of the team as well. So it's not just about what they're doing as a task, as an activity for the role, but actually being part of the team and embedding into that culture. And that's got to be driven by managers, that's got to be driven by leadership. It can't be driven, bottom up. It has to be a top down approach in those areas. So once you've got those things, in terms of you've set your foundations, you've put things in place to hopefully give that person a good start to their career with the business.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really important. And it is taking that holistic approach, isn't it? Rather than a sort of so often working in HR, we hear, well, this is HR's issue because it's about engagement and re-engaging people and resourcing issues. But I think um you said something there that it's not just a one department. It is a top down approach, but everybody plays a role in ensuring the culture is fit for purpose
Yeah.
ultimately. um and as nice as sort of pizza Fridays and beanbags in the office are, that isn't going to fix those deep rooted issues. And it does take an army
It does. Yeah.
to ensure that a culture is right, whilst HR can be the drivers of that message and feeding back to the senior leadership team, and we hope that that will channel down. We do need everyone to buy into
Mm.
that. And I always say that culture is one of the hardest things to change, but
Mm-hmm.
if you can get it right and people are buying into the company and they feel valued and they feel that their psychological well-being is being looked out for, um, then you've got more chance of tackling those issues.
And that for me is the most important thing, psychological safety.
Mm.
Ultimately, that's where it starts. You know, you need to ensure that staff feel safe to be able to be their true selves in a business and be able to approach management when there are any issues. Talking about toxic culture, we have toxic people in
Mm.
businesses, and it's really important that those individuals are dealt with promptly, so that that toxic culture doesn't breed, because it is very, very quick. Once it starts, it's difficult to stop it. So it's really important that, managers do have that really good open door policy, that they are approachable, that they make time for their team to be able to come and talk to them, and that the team are able to be honest, and say, this is how I'm feeling. You know, I might not be able to resolve the issue straight away, but this is how I'm feeling, and I might need some help with that. And then you can put a plan in place to try and address any of those concerns. Um, but as I say, making sure that we are putting in place those processes, having regular one-to-ones is really crucial. That regular communication on an individual basis is so important for managers to get to know their teams, so that in the event that something is going on, there's an opportunity there for it to kind of be picked up and dealt with quickly, rather than it festering and growing.
Mm.
Um, because of course, once it starts seeping into wider areas, it does breed quite quickly, and that is more tricky. Culture, as you say, is difficult to get right. And I've done it myself. From an ER perspective, I've gone into a business, investigated conduct concerns, and actually what is transpired is the culture of the business has driven the conduct. It's made it exceptionally challenging then to be able to take action with key individuals in relation to those matters, because actually the senior leadership were very much aware of what's been going on
Mm.
over a period of time. How can we hold one individual responsible when the senior leadership team are allowing that behaviour to occur in the first place? So it just makes it more difficult, and that's why making sure we've got these things in place to begin with, starting on the right foot with an individual, setting the tone, and then being consistent with approach as well, across the whole business, not just from department to department, but the whole business, so that people could transfer from department to department
Mm.
and still feel that they're very much in the same, working for the same company, because they have the same culture, essentially.
This is it. And you mentioned something there about, how can we hold one person accountable? It's the same with performance capability as well.
Mhm.
How often do we um, become involved with performance capability issues, and then it transpires that actually this individual is doing far more than what should ever have been expected of them. It's become almost custom and practice that they're picking up these additional responsibilities. They perhaps haven't been trained in that area, and actually that person's just been spread too thinly. So it is so important that we do look at this objectively.
Mhm,
Uh,
mm.
I think absolutely, definitely. we've talked about mental health and stigma and people feeling safe in having those conversations with management. What do you think that we can do to encourage that? Because it's easy for us to say, isn't it, that people should feel safe and managers should be approachable. We know that that should be happening, but so often we see these issues arising where that isn't happening. So, what key takeaways do you think that we could give people today to ensure that people do feel safe having those conversations? What messages can management, can HR leaders give within their businesses to take away from this session today?
Well, I think it's really important for managers to know that they are not counsellors. They are not there to diagnose any conditions. They are not there to fix a problem. They are good though. They're in a really great position to be there to listen. So that for me is what a manager's role to do really is to be able to listen to that individual and then be able to signpost. Now, ideally, businesses will, have things in place to support their teams. Not every business does, and financial constraints can be a big burden. Deloitte did actually do an exercise to say that every £1 spent on well-being offered nearly £5 return in investment. So, that was only 2022, very recent study that was taken place there. And I do think, it's very much a case of businesses need to really take notice from a well-being. It's not a luxury.
Mm.
It's an essential part now of operating a business where you have employees. Well-being is really important. We live in a really fast-paced culture widely, as
Mm.
a society. We have social media and technology at our fingertips now, so we're never really switching off, and it causes a massive problem. We saw this in lockdown when people were working on their ironing boards in their kitchens, not really having a proper designated workspace. So we're then for working longer hours. And this is still something that needs to be mindful of. We
Mm.
have a lot of businesses now that still operate on a remote basis or certainly on a hybrid basis. So again, when you are not there watching over your team, checking in on them, making sure that they are turning their computers off at a reasonable hour, that they're not overworking is really important. But taking a step back and thinking more strategically, that's the first port of call for me. And again, it doesn't matter whether you've got a really great HR strategy in place. Just think more broadly speaking, what are the objectives of the business? Where are you trying to travel to?
Mm.
And how are your people going to support that, and then consider well-being within those considerations. So how can we look after our people as part of that journey, and then think about some measures. They don't need to be expensive. There's lots of resources out there that are completely free of charge. There's things that we can do from signposting. There's some great charities out there. There's actually at the moment some pilot schemes through local governments. We've got Workwell in the local area that you could tap into from a mental health perspective, or short-term illness perspective as well. So there's some real great resource out there that I think it's just knowing where to look is the key. And it can be quite daunting, and it can be quite scary for a manager actually as well. Putting yourselves in a manager's shoes. If you've
Mm.
got somebody who comes to you and says, "I'm not feeling myself," or "I'm a bit down," or "I'm struggling," that can feel like a burden to a manager who
Mm.
might not be particularly experienced in that area. So making sure that we've got support for those people in the business as well is really important. So not forgetting our managers and our HR as part of that well-being
Yeah,
consideration.
absolutely. I think, we sit here and we say, managers should be in tune with what's going on in their teams. But I think you're absolutely right in making sure that we've got those sustainable solutions and that it's for everyone. And of course, support for HR as well. Um, Again, we sit here and we say that HR need to be ensuring that these messages are are channeled through management from the senior leadership team, through your sort of top level, level managers, but making sure that the culture supports HR, and in those strategies are in place for everyone as well, and tapping into those third party resources that are available, and often free.
Mm.
So I think is really a good starting point. But in terms of culture, I think you're right in that we're living in such a fast paced society now that it's so important that mental health and well-being has to be a priority, because without your people, you haven't got a business. And also from a moral perspective, we need to be making sure that we are looking after our people. um I think we've covered quite a lot of ground there.
Yeah, I mean, all I would say in addition to what we've covered in terms of some of those more practical steps of making sure um, the policies and the processes that we've got in place are clear, they're well communicated, and they are, adhered to. That is really important, that we have a consistent approach in adhering to policy and procedure. Sometimes you do need to go away from that, but that needs to be done with careful consideration, and it has to be right for the individual and for the business. But just some very general things, and then it's not rocket science, nothing that we're saying, we're not trying to reinvent the
No.
wheel here. It's all very, general, you know, this is what businesses really should be thinking of doing. So thinking around, opportunities for career development, if at all possible. Some businesses will argue, well, we've got quite a flat structure, there aren't a lot of opportunities. Opportunities don't have to be career progression as in promotion. It can be cross-skilling. It's looking at how we can keep challenging individuals and keep them interested, motivated. Just learning new skills is really important. And again, trying to be flexible as a business. We tend to find that businesses that can offer flexible working will have a much happier workforce than businesses that are really, really rigid in their hours. And sometimes that's difficult. Not every business can do. So you've got a call centre,
Yeah.
for example, a production line. It is a challenge, but there are things around that. So things like your doctor's appointments, how can you facilitate that better? Somebody needs a day off work. How flexible can you be to try and facilitate that type of thing, really? And then finally, recognition.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost any money to say, well done.
Yeah, agreed. And again, that can make such a big difference in how people feel about the company that they work for. If they're feeling valued and like they can have an open and honest conversation with their manager, and their concerns will be taken seriously, and we're going to look at workloads, and we're going to signpost them to helpful resources, I think you're on the right path to creating a better culture. In terms of takeaways, then, what we've pretty much said is spot the signs early, recognize your teams, your people. If somebody's becoming withdrawn, make sure you're having those conversations with them. One-to-ones ideally should be scheduled regular anyway. I'd say monthly if you can. It doesn't need to be formalised in terms of like an annual appraisal, but just to catch up with someone. But making sure that you have got that open door policy, and that people aren't waiting to speak to you as well is so important. Address the root causes, not the symptoms, I think is a massive takeaway that we've covered. Don't just look at someone withdrawing and thinking that they're becoming troublesome. I'll think that a high flyer, an overachiever, is fine, because it may well be that they're not, and they're just not comfortable to say that they're not, and actually they've sort of made a rod for their own back by being that high flyer, and they feel like they have to keep meeting their own standards almost, and it's about those people first strategies, ultimately that beat quick fixes. And for employees, don't be afraid to reach out for help. And to managers as well, don't be afraid to reach out for help. None of us have to tackle this alone. The idea is that shifting a culture and shifting a mindset is a team effort, and it does take everyone to be involved with that.
Mhm.
And of course, after Athena are on hand to help should anybody want to get in touch. Thank you, Emma.
No, thank you, Jade.